trying to think back of the very first time we met, because it feels like in some ways you've always been there. And so very grateful for that. And we were able to come together at that time through the Denver Anchor Network to figure out how we inspire the shift that we wanted to see, that at that time felt so idealistic in some ways, and it was like utopia, and now we're seeing it happen, which is really exciting. I remember when I was also confused and somebody said, "Congratulations on your new position as the executive director of Mile High Connect." I just remember saying, "I will pass that on to Dea." And that person was so embarrassed, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're both Latinas." But in some ways it speaks to the need for more people of color in leadership positions, right? And so in some ways I found that having you in this space was just incredible, to be able to say, here's another Latina who is dealing with a lot of the same pressures and a lot of the same biases and barriers, and yet we're making things happen for our communities, with our communities. Being a woman of color and a leader in this space can be really challenging. And one of the things that I found to be really helpful is having people like you that I can go to, and having thought partners, because it is tough, right? In so many spaces, my intelligence is questioned because of the color of my skin. My ability to connect and to actually deliver is questioned without even knowing me as an individual. And so in some ways, being able to come together and brainstorm ideas and ways in which we can support each other as we're creating this new world that we want to see, where people of color who have been impacted are actually the ones leading. Oftentimes there are so many people who say, we want the people who are most impacted leading these organizations, and yet when we come and we do it, we're questioned every step of the way.
It's definitely a learning opportunity. I remember the first few meetings that I had sitting at different tables with Mile High Connect's leaders, and I would look around and I would see maybe one or two faces of color and just think to myself, wow, I don't know if I should be in this space. Am I meant to be here? And so I'd look around and I'd find my peers and my colleagues, and it was always so inspiring to see folks like yourself, to see folks like Renee Martinez-Stone with West Denver Renaissance Collaborative, to see other community leaders that look like me, that sound like me, that have similar values as me, representing the voices of community and being that megaphone. And I think it's been certainly a learning curve, especially in a community like Denver that has seen tremendous gentrification and displacement of Latino and Latina communities, Black and Brown communities. So I think we have a long way to go, but we're making a lot of progress at the same time.
Yeah, I'm definitely inspired by the shifts that we're seeing. And we're seeing it a lot from funders, from communities where it's our time. And when there's even that little self-doubt, is this the right place? If not me, then who? If not now, when? And so in some ways, I feel the weight of my privilege to have been able to go to college, to be in spaces where unfortunately my communities, my neighbors cannot be. And so I honor that space, and I value it in ways that it's much more than just I'm here because I'm here, but I'm here because my communities deserve a voice in this process. And to the extent that I can provide that and being able to bring back that information to my communities, that's where I see the big power.
I feel like we've also played a role of a little bit of a translator or interpreter, because so oftentimes we go into these spaces and folks are speaking in jargon, and we have to really translate the information and make it more approachable and really just make it accessible to communities.
Absolutely, and that's such a critical role that we play, because oftentimes institutions say, well, why aren't community members here? Why aren't they? We're not making it accessible. That's why. And so I'm glad we're asking the question, and yet when you're asking people to read the 1,000-page RFP document so that they can provide feedback, that is not making it inclusive, even if you provide interpretation services, right? And so even if you provide language interpretation, it's not creating an environment that is inviting communities to actually be able to provide feedback. So my approach to working with communities has really been my own experience and remembering everything that had been done to me instead of with me. Having grown up in a very, very low income community, very low income household in the most contaminated zip code in the US, I often saw organizations that came in and said, this is what you need, this is what you need, and this is what you need, without asking me what I needed, without asking me about the skills, the talents, the abilities that I have, and to truly incorporate my voice. And so it has truly been an honor to also influence how others do the work, because I know that oftentimes, these are organizations that are coming with the best of intentions, and yet they're making mistakes. And at the end of the day, if our practices, despite being well-intentioned, continue to perpetuate this superiority-inferiority complex, we end up in very difficult situations where we end up with cycles of dependency.
I think of all the struggles that my parents faced along the way and stories that they shared with us about being told we couldn't live in a certain neighborhood, or we couldn't rent in a certain zip code, and feeling like we were almost pigeonholed into living in a certain place, and thinking, that's not right. That shouldn't be the way that it is. And there has to be a better way for us to just think about how and why we do the work that we do. And more than anything, how do I get my parents the information and the access to the information that if they would have just known that is actually illegal, they could have pursued some other avenue and actually made more empowered decisions. And so that's always, I think, one of the things that resonates with me. And when I think about empowerment and working with and in community, I acknowledge it can't just be me. And so I trust our trusted partners. I look to community organizations that have that really deep connection, those roots in community, to help build that relationship and help me in building that relationship, help Mile High Connects build that relationship and really serve as that bridge between seemingly disconnected partners and disconnected communities.
When we go beyond what's needed and we look at what's actually there, we can maximize that, and we can use that to build collective power, which is ultimately what we're working towards to change systems. And at the same time, I worry about, as an organization, how to ensure that we're continuing to be in relationship with communities, to ensure that we're co-creating instead of creating something and then imposing it on them. And so we continue to have checks and balances every step of the way, just to make sure that we are continuing to be in solidarity with communities.
I think it's so important that you mentioned relationships, because it reminds me of the relationships that we built within Mile High Connects. And I know for some of our funders, it may have seemed like we were dedicating so much time to meeting with community partners, to meeting with community. It's like, well, you have to do that. And it's necessary. That's how you build relationship. That's how I know they trust me and I trust them. And we're getting to a place of mutual relationship that it's moving away from transactional, which is, I think, the way that we've always operated. And instead saying, how can we be in relationship with one another and recognize each other's humanity, and that what you have going on in your community is just as important as what we have going on in my community and the neighbor's community. But how do we start to look at it from more of a holistic kind of relational view? I think learning and adaptability are so important. And I think the most important lesson learned that I've taken away from my experience with Mile High Connects is really around the Affordable Fares program, because this was rooted in community. It came from community. It came from community organizing. And it was community residents saying, we need affordability. We need to be able to get on the train. We need to be able to get on the bus. And it needs to not be so expensive. How do we do that? Help us think through that. And so, we did such an intentional amount of community engagement and community partnership through 9 to 5, through enterprise community partners, kind of working on the inside, 9 to 5 working on the outside strategy. Mile High Connects, we were working, kind of navigating those two inside-outside strategies. And sometimes I do wonder, like, did we make a bit of a misstep here? When we were successful in getting the affordable fare launched, we really started to hear from community, this isn't working for us. How do we make this a better program? What does that look like? And so I think part of that is honestly just owning what you're learning, owning your new lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, I think a really good point that you bring up is transparency in the process too, because that only works in being able to say, we made these mistakes, this perhaps didn't happen the way that we had envisioned. But that only works when we're transparent throughout the process. And we can say, you know, this worked, this didn't, and some of them were unintended consequences, right? Then the next step is, how do we correct it? What does this look like to make sure that whether we can correct this or to make sure that we don't make the same mistake again? So I think that's a really important part of the process as we continue to build collective power in our communities.
I'm always reminded of our Spark partners in Memphis who really focus on centering joy in Black and Brown communities. And I say that because as leaders, as women of color, as leaders of color, I think we're so driven by deadlines, right? The funder calls and wants you to submit an application, so we have to get it in. But reminding ourselves it's okay to take a little bit of time away and just find those moments of joy for ourselves, and encouraging our team to do that, I think, is really important too.
Yeah, and building the systems to actually make that happen, right?
I think one thing that I'm really hoping, and I say this with so much vulnerability and appreciation for the Mile High Connects collaborative table, it was a very difficult decision. It was a very difficult decision to come to where we landed, which was to close the organization. But I think even as a team, we started to talk a lot about the DNA of Mile High Connects, that we did not need to exist for the values and for the beliefs of the organization, that relationship building and collaboration was not us as a team, was not us as people, but rather the partners coming together, having that level of trust, having that level of relationship. So I'm really hopeful. I'm optimistic, and I'm also a little anxious because I don't know where it's gonna happen, when it's gonna land. But I truly do believe that what we're building is an opportunity for folks to go deeper, to leverage each other's strengths, and not require one organization or one entity to be that steward, but rather we can all hold aspects of that DNA of Mile High Connects and do it in such a way that we aren't making difficult choices, especially when we're faced with funder constraints and all kinds of things in our way.
One of the things that I really admired was the thoughtful listening process and being able to say, where does Mile High Connects go? What does this mean for communities? And one of the things that I truly admire was the vulnerability in saying, you know, it's time. It's time to close this chapter and continue with the amazing work that others are doing. I think oftentimes organizations hold on to that little piece and try to make it work. And it ends up hurting our communities.
I think the intangible kind of aspect of our relationship and our collaboration is really kind of where we are today. The fact that you all, as a board, as your team, saw the potential to just take on some of this work in community-owned and benefiting real estate and say, I don't know where this is going, but we're going to figure it out because we're hearing it from community, and we got to figure out a way to make this work. So I love that, and I love your just adaptability and willingness to get into the messiness with us.
As we think about the results that have come because of our work and the seeds that were planted so long ago, it's amazing to see how, you know, just a vision and an idea has actually taken life.
I feel like I've learned so much from you, Jessica, from just, I don't know, how you tell the story of CCWB and how you really just continue to anchor yourself within community. I definitely feel like there's just a lot of mutual respect here, as evidenced by this conversation and all of our conversations. I think the one thing that I honestly have learned the most from you, and I'm certainly taking away in all of my experiences, is not being afraid to push the boundaries of the institutions.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I've learned so many things from you. Even just starting with having the space for thought partnership. I just remember the many calls of like, Dea, what do you think about this? Dea, help me think through this. But I think one of the key learnings that I take away from you is your ability to connect the dots. And so your ability to be able to see not just what's happening here, but what's happening nationwide has really given me that that lens of what would Dea do in this situation? Are there others doing this type of work so we can learn from them and minimize the mistakes that we make? But I truly appreciate you.
Aw, thank you. I've always been a firm believer of learning from others. Like if we can get there faster, that's my whole belief. There's so much power in learning from other communities.